Hello and welcome to What's the Tea with ACP, a live webcast where featured artists chat with us about what's going on in their lives, their art, and their social experiences. You see, today I have on my glasses, honey, because the fabulousness that was coming out of the screen, it was burning my eyes up. So I said, let me put on my glasses today to give the girls a little bit of a different viewpoint. So let me tell you what the tea is for today. Today's tea topic is inclusivity. And this edition of What's the Tea, we'll be discussing and chatting with the fabulous mezzo-soprano Fleur Barron. We'll discuss what led her to become an artist. We'll chat about inclusivity in classical music programming and how culture affects our musical understanding. A little bit about Fleur. Singaporean-British mezzo Fleur Barron is a 2018 HSBC laureate of the Aix-en-Provence Festival and the recipient of the 2016 Jackson Prize from the Tanglewood Music Festival. It's noted that Fleur is mentored by Barbara Hannigan. In the 2021 season, impacted by COVID, Fleur sings the title role in Carmen with Arizona Opera, Ottavia in Monteverdi's L'Incarnazione di Poppea at the Opéra Royal de Versailles, Sasha Garner in the world premiere of Jennifer Higgins' Woman with Eyes Closed at Opera Philadelphia, Olga in Eugene Onegin for Gerrington Opera, and Mercedes in Carmen at Monte Carlo Opera. On the recital platform, Fleur joins regular collaborator Julius Drake for recitals at Het Concertgebouw, Chamber Music Northwest, Philadelphia Chamber Music Society in a duo recital with Eric Owens, and Oxford Lieder Festival in a duo recital with Ian Bostridge. She curates and performs a series of recitals at the Aix-en-Provence Festival around topics of empire and colonialism, curates a recital with pianist Mira Huang around Asian creators for All Compass Projects and Cincinnati Song Initiative, and performs a recital featuring Asian female composers on the theme of homeland, childhood, and belonging at the Leeds Lieder Festival. Highlights of last season include Les Autrices in So Angelica with Berlin Philharmonic under Kirill Petrenko, the title role in Handel's Giulio Cesare with NDR Radio Philharmonie in Hanover, the title role in Gluck's Orfeo with Cape Town Opera, Baba the Turk in The Rake's Progress at La Monnaie in Aldenburg Festival, Berlioz arias with the Malaysian Philharmonic, and Stravinsky's Polincella with the Munich Philharmonic. Fleur was born in Northern Ireland, raised in Hong Kong, completed studies in New York, and now lives in London. Honey, let me tell you, this bio, she's fierce. Please welcome Fleur. Hello.
Hi, love. That bio was a tongue twister.
Listen, I was so happy. I was so happy I made it through.
I should have taken out the things that didn't actually happen because of COVID. Anyway, next time.
but I was just so I was blown away by just reading it and by the experiences that you've had so far in your musical journey. I mean, wow. Wow.
Thank you.
Amazing.
It's been a intense few years. That's all happened kind of in the last 2 or 3 years, which is nice. I'm very grateful for it. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And let me tell y'all, the voice. Ooh, honey, the voice. Okay. If y'all don't know, you better ask somebody, go to the website, look at the clips because it'll blow you away.
Sounds like a man, basically.
No, it is. Listen, everything. So a little bit, I'm going to just introduce our tea topic for today, which is inclusivity. So usually if you've been watching, you know that I give the definition of what our tea is. So our tea, piping hot today, means the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those having physical or mental disabilities or belonging to other minority groups. Very interesting tea for today. I chose this tea because as you also know, if you've been watching, I like to ask the guests to come up with a few questions that we can discuss and have a conversation about. And these questions that you will see a little bit later on are wonderful, wonderful points of discussion. And when I read them, I said, oh, this will work. This will do. So I'm so happy and grateful that you were able to join me this week. And it really, truly means a lot.
Oh,
so thank you.
A pleasure to be here. And I also want to say, hi, Christine. Christine Danvers in South Africa right now.
Amazing.
A colleague of mine from Cape Town Opera. I also want to say that, Ellie and I are just two people. So we would really love to hear thoughts and ideas and sharings from all of you who are watching. So don't be shy and please participate in the discussion. That is the whole point of this, because neither of us is an expert on anything. So we want to open it up and get input from y'all as well. So just want to say that.
Yes, please. Yes, please. So I want to just ask you, where you at? What's going on?
Like spiritually,
physically today. Physically
today, I'm in New York. So I normally live in London. I moved there. I guess it's been 3 years now, and I'm just in New York for a few weeks. My mom lives here for part of the year, so I have a place to stay, which is nice. I have a good group of friends here, and I did come for work that got canceled at the last minute. Although I did the educational component of that, I did a masterclass at Temple that a couple weeks ago that happened. But I figured, even though the project got canceled, I would still come because I had the ticket, and I did my quarantine and COVID testing and all of that. And it's been nice to be here because England at the moment is in a very, very tough lockdown. We're in the kind of lockdown that the States was having last sort of March until the autumn. It's been really nice to be here and just reconnect with a couple of people. So yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And throughout, I've been asking my guests this, but throughout the quarantine and the pandemic, how have you found ways to kind of like cope with things happening? I mean, for me, I threw myself into work and into other things. Some people just needed a break, right? Some people just needed the space. So what has it been like for you during the last pretty much almost a year to when everything basically got canceled? So how's it been?
I can't believe it's been a year. Yeah. That's a good question. And I do think that we have all handled and are all handling that so differently. It's such a personal thing. And I think like my relationship with pandemic has definitely not been linear, because a year ago, basically, I definitely had a month of just being a couch potato and wallowing in the sadness of the loss of kind of everything, and what that moment represented. But in general, I'm not somebody I don't even vacation well. Like when I have a day off, like I can do a day off, but then after that, I'm ready for a project. You know, I'm just that kind of person. And so, yeah, my goodness, it's been really a lot of things, but I think one of the beautiful things that I've been doing and that you have been doing and that a lot of people I know is sort of checking out who we are and what we have to offer beyond our normal primary gift, which for us is singing. And, you know, and I think and perhaps we've also before pandemic done many things, had various jobs, you know, to make money, to pay low, or, you know, whatever it is. But I think this particular flavor of how things are going is a new development for me. And so some of the projects I've been doing have been more curatorial, more kind of producing things, creating projects and ideas with other people and pitching them to places. Because in this time of basically like cultural void where everything's really shut down and there's no work, we can't perform. So it's not about like, oh, how do I get a performance for myself or something like that. But it's like I still want to be engaged in discovering repertoire and thinking about repertoire more broadly. Like, how do you contextualize repertoire? How does music and learning music and what music I choose to sing, how is that a reflection of personal identity as well as what is happening in the zeitgeist, like in the world around us? And how do I connect with like-minded colleagues on these topics, and what can we create, if not for this month because everything's shut down, for the future? How do we create this? How do we do the research? And then who do we approach about this? And that takes a surprising amount of time, you know? And that's why this whole inclusivity topic is so, because like, I think for many of us who have been on this classical music track, we have been so used to certain parameters of repertoire, no matter if it's what kind, you know, what type of genre it is, if it's opera or chamber music or concert works. It's definitely kind of old dead white guys most of the time. You know, that's like that's where we go. And so just the research for me, so, you know, as you read in my bio, I'm Singaporean, British. I grew up in Hong Kong. I was born in Northern Ireland before that. We moved to the States when I was in high school. And then I, you know, have also spent a lot of time, now I live in London, but I've also spent a lot of time in Europe because I have family there. So just having that type of upbringing, and I've thought a lot in this last year about how little focus in my kind of professional training and also early phases of career that there has been on things outside of the box of like the package of repertoire that you're kind of handed in school or when you go to companies. It's so narrow. And so just the research takes a while, because you don't, at least for me, I don't want to do anything half-heartedly, like, oh, I'll just IMSLP something quickly and see like what comes up under female composers or Asian composers, or, you know, it takes, it has to be, I think, a thoughtful process, because it's not just about giving a platform and exploring those composers. It's also about what do you want to say with the repertoire that you're choosing and why. So yeah, it takes a lot of time. So and that's self-directed time. Like my daily schedule is kind of weird. It's not like a 9 to 5, but I'm so busy. I'm so busy. There's loads of like Zoom. I mean, this project that we might talk about in a minute that I did, Oral Compass projects with my wonderful friend and collaborator Myra Huang, around kind of Asian composers and poets. Like that was, even though we're seemingly when you watch the video, we're the only two people you see, but that was a huge community of people involved in that, which was awesome. Like, talk about inclusion. I mean, we had so many Zooms with all kinds of folks on board doing different things, donating their time. We had dancers, we had a cellist, we had producers, we had people from Wear Yellow Proudly, we had, and not just folks of Asian backgrounds, you know, all kinds of people. And that kind of talking about and discussing things with people was such, we saying, okay, now let's record it. It was like the whole journey to the recording. And even now on the post, like kind of the dissection of what we did, like it's huge, and it's time consuming and beautiful too. So that was a very long. Like, what was your?
No, that was great.
I was talking and talking.
No.
Let's get back to Elliott.
That was great. Look, I want all the deets. So that was fabulous. And the people want to know. Okay, they want to know what's going on.
They're gonna know whether or not they
No, but I totally feel you on taking the other part of your creative brain that is like the more, I don't know, the back end part, right? Like the singing and artistic creativity kind of sits at the forefront of our thoughts most of the time. And it's interesting to have to think in a way that's in the producer space, that opposite position, and see like, what does that actually take to put these things on? What are the requirements? Like, what do you need to know? And how does the lighting work? Who needs to record? Like, and also on Belonging, we have a clip a little bit later, but on Belonging, the way that it's filmed is just so beautifully done. And the way that the audio is recorded is also beautifully done. I mean, sometimes I feel like this year has forced people to be like, we need production value, boo. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because I think sometimes because we're in the operatic space and people have this like, even in the classical music space, people have this kind of like, oh, it's like old, and like, you know, this kind of thought process. They don't even like update the systems, update the equipment that we need in order to really be successful. And I think that now a lot of companies and projects and things are starting to realize like, we need to really come into this in a space of, this is a true production with production value, and really giving an emphasis on how things come across, especially on the internet, since most things are virtual now. And then also about, how does it sound? Like, how can we make sure that this sounds beautifully recorded, so that when it gets played over, you know, someone's rinky-dink computer speakers, it will still sound the way that it sounded in person. And I really want to say congratulations to you on that, and congratulations to the team and Myra, and it really is truly beautiful. And we'll kind of link to that a little bit later. But I'm wondering, this is going to have you talking for a couple minutes. I'm wondering, I'll share my story first, but how did you end up getting into classical music or classical singing? I've shared this a little bit before, but basically I started singing around the house, got involved with the Richmond Boys Choir in Virginia. Kind of that helped me start developing a musical ear at a very young age, at like 10. And then I was not ready to perform on the stage. I was very nervous and shy, and I didn't know if I wanted to do music as my career until I got to college and started applying for college. And my mom was like, apply, just see what happens. And I got in, and then my whole life kind of changed from there. And that's where I got into the classical space. But I've also always had this urge to do something more than just, I don't want to say than just singing, because what we do is not just singing, but more than just being a performer. There's another drive and passion there that I think has started to come across within this year. So I'm just wondering, how did you get into, this is like, for people who don't know, this is the question that we get when we're sitting at the donors table and someone is like, already had like 3 glasses of like red, and they're like, so, opera? How? So I'm being that person that just had the 3 glasses of red, and I'm saying, opera, classical music, how? What got you into it?
Definitely need a glass of wine or something to answer this.
Hey, cheers.
Yeah, so my journey was, I came to singing a little bit later. I guess I had always sung. So when I was living in Hong Kong, I did violin and piano and clarinet lessons. I was honestly like dreadful, all of those things. That's like the classic like overachieving Chinese, like you do everything. I did ballet and sports.
Oh my God.
I know, like scheduled within an inch of my life. And I did like choir and stuff. So I was, you know, I had kind of classical music background. And then, yeah, when we came to the States, I did choir. But then I remember when I was, you know, 18 and applying for college, I talked to my parents. I was like, I don't know, maybe I might want to be a singer. And they're like, absolutely not, you know, absolutely not. Like, you should have to get a degree and something else. If you want to do singing after that, you can. So I went to Columbia and I did my undergraduate degree in comparative literature, which was great. It was great because I already spoke French because I had been to French school in Hong Kong, and at Columbia, comparative literature. So German was one of the languages I studied. I did my study abroad in Vienna for 6 months. So I got, you know, my German got really good. And I think it was just like a very kind of broad, liberal, as American higher education often is, like kind of cross-disciplinary thing, which then served me really well when I did. So I went to Manhattan School of Music for my master's before your time. Girl, I'm older than you. When I was at MSM, I was a total fish out of water because I had gone straight from Columbia to MSM. Having basically not, like I'd had a few lessons when I was, you know, like maybe once a month I had a voice lesson, but I wasn't, and I did a choir once freshman year, but otherwise I really wasn't performing. I wasn't learning lots of repertoire. And I got to MSM and there were a bunch of people who had been doing this for a while. And I felt so insecure. You know, I was so green. I had just debilitating stage fright. Like every time I got up to perform, whatever progress I had made in my voice lesson was like back to square one. I was just total deer in headlights, everything shaking. And I'm sure people just thought, you know, how did she get here? And I often thought that of myself. Like, it was hard. My ego just took a bashing and so it was very, very stressful. But I think having that background in literature and having kind of musician friends was really great. It was like very grounding. And even though I had, you know, not much technique or things like that, I really did I was very drawn to chamber music and song because the poetry, like the texts are really juicy compared to opera where it's kind of, you're saying normal stuff. It's like the text
and repeated over and over and over again.
Exactly. It's like that special, the words in a way. And so that's when I started to get really into song repertoire because I could at least relate to the words, even if I couldn't always express with my voice how I wanted to communicate them. And then after MSM, like the whole time MSM was basically like rough for me, just like developmentally, like psychologically, it was just it was
also, like MSM is an interesting place.
It's a very, very interesting place. In a way, it was a good place for me because you can be the bottom of the pile and not like, it's not like not that I would have gotten into Juilliard at that time, but you know, I wouldn't have survived in a very cutthroat place where there's a very small, you know, thing. In a way, it was a safe place for me to be terrible. You know, there was people at so many different spectrums of talent and development, and I could just float at the bottom and like no one noticed me, and that was fine. After that, I did, you know, some opera young artist programs in the States, which was really interesting because I got I got the kind of built up some confidence doing that and got the exposure, just the experience of, you know, being on stage and also learning from more experienced colleagues and talking to lots of other people my age about their dreams. And so I started to like something happened simultaneously. One was that I started to be able to see myself more concretely as a singer, but at the same time, I have this feeling of like, somehow this path, this like mass dream that we all have that you have in conservatory, there's only one dream, it seems. It's like you go to school, you do young artist programs, you win the Met competition, and then you burst onto the international like Anna Netrebko or whatever. It's like, that was my dream. I was like, but why is that my dream? Is that actually my dream? Like that's all everyone was talking about. Oh yes, I'm going to move to Europe. Oh yes, I'm going to do this. And everyone was just so focused on that. And which is great if that's what you really want to do. But I sort of wonder in retrospect, like for how many of us is that truly the dream? And what are other possibilities that we just never talk about in school, because we don't get that like business real talk of like,
Oh no.
actually what the industry is like, and how can you have a fulfilling life in music beyond international opera star, which is going to be realistically not so many people, you know, but there are so many ways of having a meaningful career, which I think many of us are now experiencing through these entrepreneurial things we're doing and community building and other types of projects. So that was, but I felt, you know, quite fish out of water in that way, because no one else was sort of talking about that. But I had a lot of those thoughts, like, I do really want to sing, but I don't know that I want to be just doing opera all the time. And like, I don't know, you know, I love opera. It's not that I don't want to do opera, but there's all sorts of other types of repertoire and projects that I'm also really interested in, but I kind of don't know how to get a foothold there, or even really what they are. And then at a certain point, like, so 3 years ago, you know, I'd finished my young artist training, and I got a little fed up with the States, to be honest, because I feel like the premium here can be a lot on sound, on volume and sound production, because the houses are big. They're literally enormous compared to their European counterparts. So you've got to balls to the walls, baby, like you're singing your face off all the time. And
it's also like a lot of the programs are like, how much can we use you? Not in like a negative way even, but like how many different roles can we cast you in during the season? And if you don't fit into like 3 roles, they're like, you can play the stepchild under the stair.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Some people, and this is, you know, a conversations we've had a lot recently, is about the people who do casting, the lack of imagination, which is related to inclusivity in the way they cast. Like, you have your one idea of like what is acceptable voice or persona for a certain part, and then everyone else is like, okay, you're gonna do Manasseh Tosa, not Tamino, or whatever it is. Like, why? You know, and for my voice, I'm a lower, you know, I'm not a sufficient mezzo, I'm a lower, almost like a mezzo, somewhere between mezzo and contralto. And it was a little like I was often getting offered like grandmother, you know, kind of older women parts, or things with a lot of chest voice, because I have an easy chest voice, but I wasn't, you know, I was young, like I wasn't ready to do those yet. And I did one place, young artist program I did, they said, oh, well, we're offering you this cover because you have a great chest voice. We just don't hear much of that in the States. And so those types of things were signals to me that maybe I should get out for a little bit and have some experience somewhere else. So I moved to Europe. And also because I'm so passionate about art, song, and recitals and chamber music, I think partly because, unlike an opera where you're slotting into a pre-existing work where there's a director and a conductor, and there's a lot of influences on what you were doing, which is fine. That's the nature of it in a way. But with recitals, you have so much creative agency for how you want to shape that experience for yourself and for the audience. You and your collaborator, you choose the programming, you choose the story and the narrative that you want to share. You think it's extreme, it's very introspective. It's so much, for me, it feels like a more deeply creative way of engaging than opera in certain ways, just because you are the producer and the performer and the programmer. You know, there's a lot that you are doing. And so, you know, there's more of those types of opportunities in Europe, and I wanted to kind of get going there a little bit, because I've been doing like self-produced recitals in my living room, literally.
Like, come on, salon. She's in the salon.
Like, how do I actually like make that a thing that I can get paid for, you know?
Right. Right.
So yeah, so Europe was the place. And yeah, so I've been there, and then after a couple of years, I felt more secure in my own artistic identity. I mean, and one great thing that I've taken from my time in the States and my American friends and colleagues is just like the lack of shyness of reaching out and self-promoting, but in a good way. You know, it's like, hey, I have an idea. It's important. I'm going to write to this person. The worst that can happen is that they say no or they don't respond. I honestly think that is such a healthy and fabulous mindset, and not very European. Europeans are more, there's a lot of
process.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. So I have that, it's like, I'm going to create something. I feel it's really important. It's an important story to tell. It's important repertoire to share. I have the right collaborator for this. We're excited about this. What do you think? So that is partly how, I've created a lot of course, I have wonderful management, and I have work that comes through them, especially in opera and now also chamber music and concert work. But there's many types of things, like from the bio that you, like very long bio that you read.
Listen, let me just tell you, that bio was actually one of the shorter bios that I've read. So it was great information in a short space. So don't think it's long. It's a great length.
Okay. But yeah, just that, that I have also been responsible for creating my own opportunities. And when I do that, the presenter hops on board. It's great because I feel really seen and respected in the storytelling that I want to do. And I'm not subject then to somebody else's vision or, well, I don't know, I don't think you can do that, or, whatever the normal thing that we hear is. So I'm trying to do more and more of that, because there's so much fabulous repertoire out there that no one ever hears.
So much.
So much. And it's like, boggles my mind how, when I'm researching stuff, and you think, because our standard canon of white male composers, who most of them are wonderful. It's not to knock the quality of the work or anything, but it's like, I think we have this sense that the stuff that has become standard canon has become so because it's superior, more worthy or more legitimate as classical music or something. And even I, like a year ago, when I was looking into all this Asian art song rep, I was so brainwashed by that as well. I thought, I don't know if I should be looking at this early 20th century Chinese stuff. I mean, it's probably not nearly as good as, and I was just flabbergasted how sometimes I'd find these gems of pieces or composers like, why do we never hear these folks? Like, what is that about? Like, how did that even happen? And so I've just been thinking about that a lot, and, trying to do my very tiny way of like, doing what I can to, give a platform and share some of this wonderful music. But it's like just the beginning. I feel like I'm at the very beginning.
Right.
So.
But isn't that amazing when you discover the tip of the thread, right? And you just keep pulling the thread, and you discover that there's so much more behind that tip of the iceberg even. I mean, it's really amazing. And speaking of, let's see. So your project On Belonging, it was a project in partnership with Aural Compass Projects, Wear Yellow Proudly, and the Cincinnati Song Initiative. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, we talked a little bit about it before, but can you just kind of tell us, like, or tell me, us, the people watching. Also, like Fleur said, if anyone has any questions, comments, please feel free to use the chat. It will show up here, and we'll be able to put those comments up. So I'm wondering, can you just tell us a little bit about it and what was performed and how you came up, or you all, I guess, came up with how was the process?
Yeah, so basically, Michael is who runs Aural Compass Projects. He approached me, and Helen Huang, actually, who is one of the co-founders of Wear Yellow Proudly. So they approached me about a year ago now they said, are you interested in doing a recital around Asian composers and poets? And I said, of course, yes, absolutely. And I thought about, who would be the greatest collaborator for this, and that is Myra Huang. We had done something together already, and she's not only a fabulous pianist, but an incredibly thoughtful, kind, conscientious, intelligent human. And so, in terms of a collaborator for this, I wanted somebody who would be just just as eager and joyful in the research process, because I think that's important, like to have that curiosity about doing the process as much as the performance. And so, and it was like literally that vague at the outset. It wasn't like they said, okay, this is the theme, you need to do such and such composers. It was like a completely blank slate, which was great. But then also a little overwhelming, because I remember like Tyra and I, we said to each other, you normally, like when you do a recital, you do some stuff that you know, and then maybe some new stuff as well. And for both of us, there was no stuff that we knew. Like we had, neither of us ever performed Asian creators before. And that was actually, we both felt a lot of shame about that, because it's like personal shame, but also like shame on behalf of our industry, that because like, so she's Asian American and grew up here, and I did my early classical music training in Hong Kong, like not in voice but in instruments. And even there, I never played, when I was playing violin, piano, clarinet, you'd think like, oh, in Asia, like you'd play some Asian composers. No, they were all Western. And so, yeah, and that's kind of like shocking when you think about that. And especially as like Asian, you know, I'm obviously biracial, and Myra being Asian American, like you'd think like we would have been encouraged perhaps in school, or been at least exposed to, or when you do your final recital and there's talk about what you do, like there would have been some talk about, oh, this would be a good idea, would you like to check this out, or that we ourselves would even have had the thought for ourselves. No, none of that. And that's where I think there's this sense of really like just kind of shock. And so then it's like, well, how do we even begin? Like, where do we even begin? Like, how do you begin with that process? And so I reached out to Helen, because she has been pre-pandemic even, she has been posting things on her social media of kind of her favorite Chinese art songs. She was born and grew up in China, so she speaks Mandarin. And I always thought, wow, you know, they're really beautiful. And so I wrote to her and I just said, you know, Helen, do you have any recommendations for a starting point of like who are your favorite composers? They don't have to be Chinese. Like I am ethnically Chinese, but I'm open to really anything. I'm interested in learning. That's the thing. I think it's like, I want to learn and discover. So who, like, and what, because I don't know, like, what are the sound worlds that appeal to me? Who are these composers and what are their backgrounds? I'm really interested in people's personal stories and how that impacts their music. So that's part of the research too. It's not just like, oh, this song sounds pretty. It's like, what happened in that composer's life, or what's their backstory? And then that makes the music, it can be much more interesting. So she sent over some suggestions. Mostly they were pieced in Mandarin. And I had studied, my Mandarin isn't very good, but I had, you know, studied that in Hong Kong. And so I'm happy to help you with the language, which was great. And then I reached out to a couple of the folks, like one of my mentors, contemporary music specialist, Lucy Shelton, who does fabulous. And she knows a lot of living composers of all sorts of folks. And I asked her, but then I also just did a lot of Googling and YouTubing, and I compiled like an enormous list of just names and time periods. And it was just like, you know, there was nothing, there was no like organized process about this. Like I was like, I had no game plan. It was just, deep dive into the unknown and see what comes up. And it was kind of constantly overwhelming, because like just like, but not in a bad way, but just in a way of like, you know how you have like in life, there'll be sometimes those experiences where like, wow, like I wish I had done that when I was younger, or, you know, it was often that feeling of like, wow, why am I only just coming to this now? Because yeah, like not all composers or pieces of Asian descent are amazing, but there were enough things that I found that I was really inspired by, that I just thought, oh, how do I even like begin to construct a program? So that's where all of this group Zooms that we had were so great, and where I feel like the project was like, for me, it was like an identity piece in a way. It was partly about exploring my own background and connection to this music and identity as an Asian woman and Asian musician, but it was also about, just as importantly, about connecting with a community of people who care about that just as much. And they weren't, like Michael, they're not all Asian, which is important, I think. And just having this influx of perspectives. So we would have, for example, we had a whole hour and a half Zoom about choosing a title. It's it took an hour and a half. What are we trying to say? And what is the most inclusive word? Because words, as we know, have so much power. And sometimes you can have an intention, but then the word you choose has a different impact than what you mean. Having that mindful, and it's nice to share the responsibility when you're doing something that feels kind of new, new industry, and also new for you. I certainly take a lot of courage from having friends and supporters that I can share with and get input from. So, but I think, that community experience, for both Myra and I, we talked a bunch of times about how it was the first time, we had both had, conversations about Asianness within our families, but kind of not with a community of Asian friends, or that type of thing. That was really new, and I didn't realize until I was having those conversations how much I really needed that and how important that was for me. And just being able to laugh about stuff, stereotypes, or things that we send each other articles, or all this kind of thing. So that was a really important part of the process as well. So it literally took the concert, the On Belonging recital was aired. It first premiered, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, and it's on for one more week. So I hope people who are watching, please watch. It's not long. It's 50 minutes, and there are 9 composers featured. The song, so they're mostly living composers, and
oh, I think we got frozen.
Ooh.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Okay.
We're back. We got it. They're mostly living composers.
Mostly living composers, and over 50% are female composers, mostly East Asian. Because for me, I had to start somewhere. So since I am of East Asian background, that was my starting point. But moving forward, I want to explore other types of repertoire in other languages and stuff. And so some of the pieces are in Mandarin. There's one in Cantonese, because I grew up in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong, as you may know, has been going through huge turmoil in the last year and a half politically, with, which is, I think, partly to do with too rapid post-colonial pullout after the British left, and then there wasn't enough kind of in place for Hong Kong to maintain its independence in the long term. So China now is, it's doing everything it can to suppress the democracy and the political patterns that have been in place there for some time now. And so it's a very difficult time for Hong Kongers. And there's suppression of free speech, of what you can write in the press, all of this kind of stuff. So it's a really tough time. And so I had wanted to make sure that I had a couple of perspectives of Hong Kong composers. So I found one who's still living there, and one who had emigrated and is now, so the one living there is Kai Young Chan, and the one who's now living in the UK called Raymond Yu. And Ray had introduced me to a wonderful Hong Kong Chinese, now emigrated to the UK composer, a queer composer called Mary Jean Chan, who she writes, her poems are incredible. There's it's intersectionality of so many topics, so things to do with race and gender and sexuality and struggles of identity and belonging, but it's all, and kind of subtle, everything is subtle, but you can infer so much depending on, I guess, who you are and what you want to read into that. So Michael Lewis from Oral Compass Project bought the rights to this poem that was unpublished, and Ray said it. Wow. So we had world premiere Bright Fear on this recital as well. So it was a lot of a lot of things like that, and one of the most meaningful aspects of the project for me was, I think there's there's two. So there's one Chinese folk song and one composer by an early 20th century composer. He's dead. But everyone else is living. And so having a lot of email exchanges and talking to these composers was amazing, because when I wrote to them to ask, if they had a piece that would speak to the theme of belonging in some way, I wanted to keep it really open-ended, like not to say, oh, it should be like this, or do you have something that sounds cheerful, or whatever. It's sort of like whatever they want. And I was really interested in hearing their stories and their ideas, and that was good for me to know, and for Myra to know when we were performing the pieces. So because you're kind of a vehicle not only for your own experience, but for the experiences of the people who've written these pieces.
Right.
And yeah.
Wow. I didn't want to cut you off, because I'm learning so much just from the knowledge. I don't even think you realize the knowledge that you're putting into the space right now, and the interperception. I don't know, that's not a word.
Love it. It's a great word.
But getting to be able to see kind of the viewpoint that goes on when creating, and when taking on an artistic goal, all of those little things that kind of go behind it, I think is so important. And I think it's important for us to talk like this, because people don't realize it. People don't know, like, okay, you did a recital, but how did you get there? And I think it's important for people to know that, so that the next generation or the next person who tries to do it can have an idea of, like, okay, well, this is what Fleur did. Maybe I can try to do something similar, or maybe it inspires someone else to, like, get in touch with some more spaces of their own identity. And I think these kind of conversations are so important. But we have a couple of questions to answer. But before that, I'm going to share a little clip from On Belonging. This is Fleur Barron and Myra Huang performing The Far Shore, with text by Mira Bai and music by Kamala Sankaram. Did I say that right? Yes, Kamala Sankaram. And yeah, we're just going to play a little clip. So let's hear it. Oh my goodness. I get so emotional watching my colleagues sing. I think you're muted. Maybe. Let me see if I can.
I was
Okay,
muted.
there we go. Um, but I get so emotional because, especially when I've seen the clip before, but when there is when you hear the journey that went on behind something, it really makes it that much more exciting, I think, and that much more personal, and it just touches you in a different way. And as I was listening, I started to get emotional because I was just like, wow, this what a journey that this has taken to get here. And Justin says, wow, brava. And he ain't wrong.
Thank you.
So I wanna chat. Also, brava. I mean,
Thank you.
y'all did that.
It's a great song too.
Y'all did that.
Yeah.
Also, hard music.
Yeah. Rhythmically not it wasn't the easiest. Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay. What's our key signature? Great. Love that. So I want to talk a little bit about the questions that you sent in because they are really fabulous. And I think they lead in so beautifully to what we were just talking about. So the first question is, what can we do on a personal level and institutional level to make classical music programming more inclusive? Can you give a little bit of context behind what you wanted to say regarding this question? And then we can discuss.
Yeah, I mean, it does relate to things that we have already talked about in this chat, and just the kind of, because now in pandemic times, when a lot of the digital content we've been seeing from friends and colleagues, it has been much more inclusive than usual, and a lot of institutions or venues have given their diversity pledge, and then you hope they're going to follow through. It's hard at the moment because there aren't really performances to know exactly how that's going to pan out. But I do find it weird. For example, in Europe, there are places, well, I'm not going to say where, but there are places that have still been streaming concerts that have made their diversity statements, and the programming is like still the same. And it is, and this is why I wanted to bring up the personal and institutional level, because often, and now I'm just talking about mostly recitals, it is often the artists who choose what programming they do. But if an institution puts out a diversity statement, which we need, about a commitment to greater inclusivity, then if the artists are not on their personal level are not committing, or perhaps they're not aware or whatever, then I feel it is the responsibility of the institution / venue / promoter to perhaps put in some parameters. And I was just thinking of, for example, I know Manhattan School of Music, they have an initiative this year to make sure that every single performance, even if it's just a student recital or whatever, that has to, each performance done has to feature a Black creator. It doesn't have to be a Black composer, it could be a Black poet or whatever. That's great. That's a parameter that's not restrictive. There's a gazillion things you could choose within that. It's still incredibly creative, but that then holds the individual artist accountable to a greater social initiative that we're trying to all make change for. So that's kind of what I was thinking, because it just, there's just like, not everyone and everything is on the same page. So I've just been thinking about it. It's not that I have answers, but I know just for me personally, that's part of obviously this On Belonging project. But a lot of I've made a commitment to myself that for every recital that I have coming up, because I do quite a lot of recitals. They come in quite frequently, so to speak. Is that and if I have programming agency, I am committing for myself to make sure that I am programming some Asian composers on those programs, and I am doing that, and it's great, and so far I've received no pushback, at the place, and I make sure to, sometimes I write my own program notes just to give, which is part of the gentle educating And again, it's not because I am superior or know everything, but it's just because these things it's personal for me. It's important to me. And why would somebody know that if they don't know me? If they're just hiring me, they don't know anything about me necessarily on a personal level. So if I write some program notes, then that gives a glimpse into the why and into what it is that I'm hoping to communicate with the pieces that I've chosen. Yeah, those are some thoughts. I'm curious to hear your thought. I mean, I have other ideas, but I'm
no, but yeah.
As well. Yeah.
So I think it starts with asking questions. I think that our industry, the classical music industry, has gotten so used to plug and play, almost like we have our list of great composers, and it's easy to simply go into the canon and pick, oh, okay, all right, let me just doop, 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 doop. You know what I mean? Yeah. And even if it's something that seems, for instance, like I saw that you did Venturizer, right? Which is typically done by men, typically done by baritones, right? And you kind of took that piece and put it on its head in a way, because it's not done that often by female singers or even higher voice singers for that matter. Yeah. And so even if it's things like that, where we take the canon that is some of it that is already there, and we start to make adjustments and we start to switch things and turn things around. I mean, if we're talking about inclusivity, it doesn't mean you don't do, I don't know. It doesn't mean that you don't do La Bohème. It doesn't mean that you don't do La Traviata. But what it does mean is that you make sure that the cast, the director, the crew, the orchestra, well, sometimes the orchestra, because orchestras are tricky, but you make sure that everyone you have agency over is being included and their voice is being heard. I would love to see, I've seen so many operas where the title cast is all white, right? Or white presenting, even for that matter. Yeah. And there's so much more space here for, I think a lot of companies think we're being inclusive because we're doing an opera or we're doing a program of a Black artist on Black music with Black artists. And it's like, no, you're being specific. What you could be is be even more open and what is the canon, what can we put already, what do we have coming up that we could put artists in that are not what typically audiences would see within the space, right? Or why don't we present African American art songs that don't have anything to do with being Black? There are many African American art songs out here, or just art songs in general by BIPOC people that don't have to do specifically with being of color or the experiences we have. Now, of course, that is ingrained into the piece in some spaces and for some composers. However, there is the opportunity to say, I'm going to have a recital of BIPOC composers and have people of all different backgrounds sing in this recital. I think when music doesn't have something specific to say about race or your identity, I think that it should be performed by anyone. I mean, it's just like any other art song, right? Now, we're talking about spirituals, it's a little bit different, folk songs, a little bit different, but just art songs in general, and also just the operatic pieces. And it's interesting too, because I think a lot of the operas that are written by Black composers are written for Black people. Like it kind of lends itself to our experience as Black people. And so I would like to see more composers write about just life experiences, and keeping keeping a perspective that's open to and not just so specific. I love that there's specificity. I think it's important. Don't get me wrong. But I think that there's also a space there for composers of color, queer composers, different types of people to write about different things that they may not even have experience with, right? Or just like a funny opera about, I don't know, going to the supermarket. You know what I mean? Like, why can't we have more of that? And I think that will help. I think, unfortunately, it will help companies think about things more inclusively. So maybe that's part of it, is like the research and asking questions like, how can we be more inclusive? How can we make the stage reflect what's happening every day in our lives? It goes past like race. It's also inclusive body types, inclusive hair types, inclusive stories that need to be told that we simply have not heard about. And
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be historical. You know what I mean? Because I think we get that too. It's like, well, we're casting this I mean, no, it's just like, there's so many topics that operas can be about, or shows can be about, or songs. So let's try to make that more of an inclusive space too. I mean, that's my idea on it.
I love that. You said so many important things, and I feel like that relates to, I've been thinking a lot about like, what is the relationship between tradition and innovation? And I feel like a lot of companies have this idea that innovation is you do a world premiere. Then you do a world premiere, then you can have a Bohème and a Carmen and and you do your white casting, whatever. But then you have a world premiere, and that's your innovative thing. But actually, what you're saying, which I think is so wise and so needed, is that innovating, like you can innovate in the sense that, because we haven't had a lot of that yet, but just change up the way stuff is presented, or the narratives that we want to say with works we already have.
Exactly.
And because it's just human stories as well, and who we all are with our different backgrounds, whatever. We're going to bring something to that by virtue of the way we look and what we bring to the table as humans, because we get cast in that role. And I was really interested to see, like, Opera San Jose, they're doing, I saw, I think it's a Marriage of Figaro that they're setting in colonial India in the period, where the Susanna and the Figaro and the Marcellina are people of color. And they're doing a whole kind of exploration of that piece about racial dynamics and like socioeconomic dynamics in that kind of time period, but that's still like so relevant to today. And I thought that was just, like really awesome, and a really like, we haven't seen a lot of that, like most what I see is definitely all white casted, so right. And also, like, in terms of, because I was thinking back to what, like, say when people do graduation recitals at school, at least in my time, if I don't know, if there was, like, I mean, I had some friends who they would do like a spiritual that was like the encore, and then everything else there was your like four groups of like French, German, whatever. Or like, I had a Korean friend, and she did a couple of Korean, art songs, and it was like the last two things on the program, almost as if you're like ethnic programming is like an afterthought, or somehow less worthy of being included into the main thing. Like you're saying, like it needs to stand out alone as like, oh, these are my community pieces, and then here's all of the standard accepted canon. But actually, I feel like when I'm doing my Asian programming now, I'm not doing like a set of Asian songs. Like, I'm doing mixed programming, so it'll be like a Schubert with an Asian composer, and then someone else. Like, it's all mixed, so that the audience they're not allowed to sit there and go, okay, Schubert, and now the exotic pieces. Right. I don't want them to think that, because that is not how I feel about them, and I don't see myself as being exotic. So that's not the story I want to tell of that. So I think that, it's like the traditional format of recital, but then I'm just talking about my example, but then kind of innovating, changing it up. Like, who says that things need to be done a certain way? Like, all these things we learn, or like, whether it's, your 5 arias, and you just have one in each language. Or 4 groups in 4 languages. Why? Like, why is that a thing? I don't know. Because yeah, so I find that actually totally mystifying, like how that has now become like codified as the rules that we somehow just blindly follow. But it's like we don't do a lot of questioning of why are other ways like not as acceptable or less educational if you're, say, in your master's program. Like, why is it less educational to just leave out, say, a French set? And I mean, okay, I understand you have French diction, but sure, like, you know, I just think there needs to be a little bit more open-mindedness and flexibility in approach to programming, so that there is room for all sorts of folks to feel that they can choose the pieces that really speak to them, and that they don't just have to like fit into a little box. They might fit into that box depending on who they are, but many people might not. So, you know, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, even I think, how fabulous would it be to, you know, think, if we're talking about recitals, and sometimes I've gotten into the box because it's like school teaches you this is what you're supposed to do in a recital, of like, okay, you need 3 languages and then like 1 in English and like 1 fun song. You know, it's like that kind of like, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, what happens if it would be amazing if I could do 3 languages and they all be Black composers, or 3 languages and they all be people of color.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's very hard to find. If I had to do an Italian set, I'm sure there are Black composers that wrote music in Italian, but it's hard to find that. You know what I mean? It's hard to be able to program and actually show an inclusive programming when the program guidelines are Eurocentric.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, the interesting thing, that when I say we need to ask questions, this is a part of the discussion, right? Like the conversations that we're having now is like, hello, we're giving you this for free. Like, you know what I mean? And I think maybe there's space for companies, schools, programs to really take these kind of thoughts into account of like, well, maybe why don't we do a recital that's about, you know, why does it have to be those specific things, you know? Why couldn't it be like, why don't we have one of the requirements be a set, a set? I don't know what the requirements would be, but why are they so restrictive? And I think maybe they thought originally it was like to help the performer feel like they could, like I said, plug and play. But really, sometimes it's very restrictive. I mean, like, how many times am I going to do a Toasty set? Like, like, Jesus, I didn't know back then that I had the ability or authority to do that, because I was young and didn't know, and also no one told me that I could. No one gave the artistic space for me to feel like, oh, I can like explore. I can really like grasp different things and take these things into consideration. And it's also because we most of the time we're so focused on, we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this, and it like has a short period of time, and like it needs to get done, and you're being graded on it, and it's like we don't actually get enough time to like musically explore sometimes. And so I think that's something to definitely start thinking about, how we do that.
I think
Yeah.
you're right. I think it's tricky, because what the regulations that we learn in school tend to stay with us because it's drilled into you. Like, when you do recital, you do this, or this is the repertoire that is okay. It becomes so ingrained that it is harder once we're out in the world doing our thing. Like we're so conditioned then to be predisposed towards certain composers or whatever. And so it's not that, you know, that I think institutions should throw out German diction classes and then the correlation with programming in a German set. But it's just like, what about that? And
right.
Because at the end of the day, and I think this is like just a more philosophical point about, you know, career and a professional life in music, of that many of us who go into school for music may not be staying in music for the long term. That is fine. But then you still want to make sure that what you are learning in that music degree is going to set you up well for life. And if you feel that who you are in some fundamental way, or something important about your identity, isn't being seen or isn't being given space because of the parameters in place, then that's maybe less useful. And also, I think, like recitals, as I said before, every recital should be, I think, an identity project because of the degree of agency you have in choosing everything. And as opposed to like ticking off boxes, well, I've got to graduate, I've got to do this, I've got to do these 4 languages. I feel it should be more about, okay, this is like the end of an era and the opening of a new door. Where am I as an artist? What do I want to say? How do I choose the repertoire? Sure, I'll do some pieces in French of that, but yeah, exactly. Why could it not be a Black composer who's written stuff in French? There are, but then, and at the moment, there's so much onus on us all as individuals to push for those changes, or to say, hi, I'd really like to do something different, and then hope that you get the green light.
Right.
And that's fine. Like in the meantime, it's fine. It's like, that's just the way it is in this very transition-y phase that we're all in. But at a certain point, it can't, because not everyone has the type of personality, for example, or the type of maybe experience, whatever, to be assertive in that way. And I'm thinking specifically now about Asian international students who are coming into a culture that is unfamiliar, who don't have this facility, not necessarily the same comfort around the language. It depends on the student, but often, like I would say something like at least 50% of, say, Manhattan School of Music is international students.
Oh, 100%, if not more.
Right, exactly. And so, and not all cultures are the same. Like my own, like moving here and then feeling like, wow, Americans are so comfortable with expressing themselves. Like not everyone has that, so, and then it could be easy for people in this current climate to have ideas that they might want to try, but to feel like, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to have the teacher not support me, or, there's a lot of people, especially when you're young, like we're a little bit older, that like, thank goodness I'm not in school anymore. That's what I think all the time. Like, oh my God. Because I had that hardcore, like I had ideas in school, and that was part of my upbringing and my personality. I was very much a people pleaser and wanting to like fit in and try, all of that. And so, yeah, I think, that this thing of the personal and the institutional, there needs to be a meeting of a halfway point, so that you can't just expect, like all of us to be pitching everything and like, hey, wake up. This is, here are some ideas that you should consider that are really valid, and, or whatever. So, yeah.
I agree. I think this leads us into your next question perfectly, because the next question was a kind of combination question. What is the role of culture in musical understanding and expression? How do we stay true to our course artistically or professionally amidst pressure to assimilate to a more conventional way? Interesting question. Wow. Go ahead.
Well, what just popped into my head for the first one, because, when I've been talking over these last many months to Asian musician friends, and a friend of mine had shared, and I've been hearing, because, I'm very white passing. So I've had enormous privilege in my life and in my professional life in terms of navigating issues of race. Like for me, it hasn't been an issue in terms of casting as far as I'm aware. But of course, like, because I still am of that community, I really care deeply about what happens to people I know and that experience. And I want to do something about it if I can, and support my community. And one of my friends had shared that she's a pianist, and she's Chinese American, but born and raised in China. And then she recently finished her, I guess, master's in London at a school there. And she'd gone through it, like and she's a completely fluent English speaker with a flawless American accent, I need to add as well. So you would think she's Chinese, like Chinese American, born in the States, etc. Anyway, so she had a couple of experiences where she was playing, I forget, some like romantic French piece, and the teacher said to her, "Oh, you know, you may not understand this because you're Chinese and it's a very different culture, but there needs to be a lot more passion, and you're playing it in this kind of mechanical way. But don't worry, I'll be able to help explain how the passion needs to be, but you'll have to work really hard," is what this person said to her. And so my friend, you know, and there's been a lot of things like that. And so she said that it made her think a lot about, like, what does it mean? So she's a Chinese pianist, basically playing Western classical music, but like then how does her identity as an Asian person fit into this Western thing? And like, should it? She just feels like, well, I thought I was just a person playing music until this teacher made me aware that I'm a Chinese person playing Western music, and I don't have the instinct for it. And so, you know, I've been hearing a lot of stories like that, and I'm perhaps, like, I don't know that it was the teacher's intention to, you know, like, obviously that was an incredibly hurtful thing to say, and I doubt that they realized that, because again, in that Western framework of immense privilege and making a lot of assumptions about cultural understanding, which is that, like, if you, from that Western perspective, you know more, you are the source material of all that is great, like literature, music, whatever. And if you're foreign or perceived as being foreign, you might have potential, but you need a lot of work, you know, and I will show you the way. Like that, it's a whole imperialism, like it just brings up so many things. And it's just amazing the degree of conditioning we have, how embedded that is, that I'm sure, like somebody who could be a very kind-hearted person, you know, we all have implicit biases. In other words, it's like you might be so used to thinking something that you don't even realize that what you're saying is incredibly insensitive and also just not true. And yeah, and that there are many different ways of being expressive. There are many different ways of conveying passion. Does lurching around the piano, is that the only way of of expressing passion, or like having your face, you know, like, no, you know, but that's what we were taught in the Western thing of, like, oh, well, Western people are more expressive because we're louder, we gesture more, whatever. And that's what we assume, like, oh, that equals expression. And other things which are more, say, subtle, are less expressive. Who says? Like, you know, so that was that thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Because I mean, to be honest, there's that space of the intersectionality between being an American as well, that the ideals that I've learned as an American also sometimes have negatively impacted me in the way that I've reacted to certain things. Like, for instance, I'm in college, 18 years old, and I had just met this friend of mine, and I was so used to just be like being out there and being like whatever, and I like touched her hair. And I thought we were like good friends. I mean, we were good friends. But she immediately, like, I mean, went off on me, and I was like, what just happened? And I learned in that moment that was something that was absolutely, like, unacceptable for her culture, right? And I didn't know that because I'm an American kid. We don't learn about cultures. You know what I mean? It's kind of effed up, but, like, we don't learn about other cultures and how we can respect other people, and also, like, personal boundaries and personal space, where I think some other cultures sometimes know a little bit more about, like, personal, or are more aware of that, especially when we're traveling. I think if I were an American in another country, I would be more thoughtful. I would have been more thoughtful. But because I was in my own country, I perceived everyone to have the same values that I had, or the same thoughts that I had, or the same emotions, or the same experiences. And as I've gotten older and come into adulthood, I've realized that really we all have such different experiences. Even if we feel like we have a similar culture or a similar identity, it doesn't, you can be from, I could be black and you could be black, but you're from France and I'm from America, and we have a totally different viewpoint of what it is to be a black person, right? We're both black, but we have a totally different viewpoint. And I think it's interesting that culture, right? We're talking about the word culture. Culture doesn't mean necessarily just your ethnicity or your race, right? Culture is also your religious background, your interpersonal experiences, anything that makes a group of people has a group of people that has similar ideals as a culture. Um, so I think learning about cultures and not learning about them to appropriate them is important. I think learning about cultures and getting a bigger world view, because the world is huge. There's so much we can't know, don't know. Um, and we have to be a little bit more willing to do the work, to understand different cultures, and also see how we can be, I think, to see how we can be agents to boost other people's cultural awareness. Because I think so many times, I mean, even myself, I tend to, I did like, so I did a project in undergrad that was about, it was for vocal pedagogy, about how to help trans singers when they're going through transition and being able to still sing within the transition of their voice, right? And so I did all this research and I like reached out to people and all of this. And I realized I was doing all of this research, but that wasn't my experience, right? And that's a culture that I didn't know about. I didn't have experience in. But in order to write my paper, I had to do the research. As I've grown up, I've realized that I've taken a big stand in allyship for the trans community, right? I don't have, from what I know, I don't have any out trans friends per se. And I sometimes have to take a step back in the way that now this is just like a culture conversation, but I have to take a step back sometimes and say, like, I don't actually have experience in this. And I want to be an ally, but I also don't want to come off performative. And I also don't want to give facts that are not true to a community and a culture that I'm not a part of. Right. So this is just putting it into a perspective that people see that it's not just like black, white, Asian, whatever the thing may be. There's also other parts of culture that we might want to be a part of. Like I love the LGBTQIA community. I love many different cultures and communities, but you can't always, just because you love the community doesn't mean you can insert yourself into the community, right? Or into the culture. And we have to really be observant of that and understand that through our expression, sometimes we can push those boundaries. And we have to sometimes take a step back to understand the culture and to be able to say, this is what I feel, or this is how I want to be a part of it, and not say, not putting those like, I don't know how to explain what I'm trying to say, but yeah.
Yeah, I love what you said. I think that's so true. It's a nice reminder for all of us about the work that we have to do, because we are all, being human, we're so
Right.
quick to judge around what is familiar and comfortable to us. And I think that, like, that anecdote that I shared in before of my friend, and it when she was telling me that, I thought, that's interesting, because to me, it seems like an invitation to listen, like what you were saying about taking the step back. I think we are very quick to, particularly as singers, we are very expressive, very quick to communicate perhaps, but there is such, I know for me in this last year, I have done a lot more hardcore listening than I think I've ever done in my life. Not just outside of me, but also inside of me. And it is a slightly different space than when we're engaging like in and out of it all the time. Just listening and right, because as you said, the world is very big. There's a lot that each of us doesn't know about stuff. And we're going to find ourselves in an unfamiliar environment or have something or someone that isn't familiar to us in our environment. And I think the human tendency is to try to figure it out and figure out where it is on the scale of what we know. But actually it's like that thing of listening, which it so relates to being a musician as well. It's like, okay, so this is different, but different is also beautiful. It's valid. It's worthy. It's beautiful. It's just different. That's all it is. And it reminds me of a couple years, 2 years ago, I did a production of the first and last time. I think I'm going to do now. Butterfly.
A butterfly?
Yeah. They
wow. Okay.
Well, they did it so they wanted Asians for the Asian character. So I Suzuki, and to their credit, like they brought in a Japanese choreographer / movement director to work with those of us who were supposed to be playing Japanese people to make sure that the way of being on stage was kind of authentic to that time period. And that was a steep learning curve because I'm like a tall, kind of energetic, I'm not dainty, that person's like brought up a lot of like shit from my own childhood of just like issues around not feeling Asian enough and not Asian feminine enough and all kinds of stuff because she wanted me to do it's a lot of like micro movements, and she was saying that Japanese women even today because also as an opera singer, my tendency once I get on stage is like melodrama, everything, because you're like, oh, I've got to play to the last row, all this stuff, and so it was hard not to do all that. It's just like built into my like DNA. And so I was also wearing a traditional Japanese outfit, which makes the movements easier because they're very restrictive and like these wooden shoes. And but she was saying to me, like Suzuki, so in this particular production, Suzuki was on stage always the whole time, basically standing there
of course
with tea or like servant tea things.
Always.
Yeah. Yeah, just be like shuffling in with like the tea. But she was saying that like Suzuki can be a very impactful character through subtlety of gesture. And like she said, I said, but how is the audience going to see anything at the back if I'm just doing like a small hunch as opposed to a big, they're not going to see. She's like, no, trust me, they will, because it's not just the movement. It's that the movement, these small movements are imbued with personality and they're full of emotion and intensity, but just on a much, much, much smaller scale than Western people are used to. And I was like, oh, so we really practiced it. And then it got to the point where it was incredibly comfortable. It took 3 weeks. I mean, we were in rehearsal every day, It was 3 weeks. And then I was like, oh, and it was so interesting for me just being in that space of, because I have to say, I probably gave her like pushback at the beginning in a more, slightly aggressive way than I would have wanted to, because I was so dubious that what she was saying, I was like, this is not going to read. I mean, I didn't say it like that, but I was thinking.
No, but like, right, yeah.
I was like, there's no way, But it's interesting because people that I knew who came to the show, they said, and I hadn't told them about all of this, and they just said like, it was so powerful what you did, because it drew the eye more than the normal, like the American characters, what they were doing, because each movement was very economical, but each one had conveyed a lot more than when we are free and we move all the time and whatever. And just these, so I learned a lot from that experience about a different way of expressing, a different way of communicating, both when I was singing and just when I was occupying space holding a tray of tea. It was like there was a lot of lessons in there in and I had to deal with my own bias about that, and like what is like acceptable for the operatic stage, and even just who I am as a performer, and all of this kind of thing. So I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for that experience, because it caught me by surprise. So
wow, that's totally, like, I think that's exactly where this question was kind of leading to, is like, you know, how does your own, in a way, how does your own culture really influence the way things are? And, you know, with the second part of that question, how do we stay true to our course artistically, professionally, amidst pressure to assimilate? I think that that's just, like you said, listening, and also acting. When you have the chance, act. You know, like, for instance, you were presented with this project opportunity. You could have been like, I don't know about that. But you acted, right? And it took you on a journey that led to a point where you discover more about your own interpersonal identity, your national identity, your cultural identity. And I assume, I would bet that it did even more than you thought it was going to, in developing this project. And I think that it's so interesting that when we take a moment to really learn, and when we take a moment to really speak up, and put our stories out, or other people's stories out, how much of an impact. I mean, like I was saying, looking at your video, I'd seen the clip before, but because I knew what was behind it, because I knew that there was this passion behind it, it touched me even more than it did when I saw it the first time, because I knew that it wasn't just, I mean, I didn't think this before, but I knew that it wasn't just you singing. You know what I mean? Yeah. I knew that it was a part of your musical journey. And I think we need more of that. I think we need more of that.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I think this time has, for me, and I think for many of us perhaps, I've been doing a lot of thinking about, like, why do I do what I do? Like, why am I on this path? What, all of these types of questions. And I think it is easy, especially when you're a young singer, but other times too, just to get into this thing of wanting to be liked, wanting to be hired, that a lot of what you do, of course, hopefully you love what you do, but it's also like everything is goal oriented to be about approval from an external entity. And this time has been much more about like me, but not hopefully not in a selfish way, just it's like, it's easy to kind of in a way neglect your own self-exploration, because we're doing life, we're gonna, I don't know, relationship and career goals, and there's like so much stuff that it's easy to get caught up in. And then, but sometimes I think now is such a great moment to just like check in with yourself and your relationship with the things that you do and the people that you have, and to engage in and to have courage to want to check things out, and to ask questions of yourself and maybe other people too, and because that's important. That's how change, I think, is going to happen. It's not going to come from like hope, putting out a statement and hoping for the best. It's going to come from asking questions, and not being afraid to hear what the answer is, and then challenging that, or saying, okay, I've been doing this, now I want to try this, and I'm doing this for me, it's important to me, and who else can I connect with who would be a great partner on this journey? There's all sorts of us out there now doing awesome projects. And so I love that. I draw a lot of courage in staying true to my guns, because I see other people doing that. And even if I'm not going to hop onto their project, or it's just not like that is kind of in the air right now. And there's this sense of like, at the end of my life, I know that that's going to be the most important thing. Like, not whether I played according to the rule book and everyone was really pleased with me, that's not the point. So yeah.
Wow. This has been an amazing conversation.
Yeah.
an amazing conversation. What a great topic. I feel like we're going to have to do like an identity part 2 because there's so much, there's so many different things.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things to unpack. And
yeah.
You also, to be clear, Fleur is busy. Okay. She got another thing she got to run to. So we're going to wrap up, but, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences and sharing your artistic passion and your ability and your mind. A lot of times I think we don't necessarily always see our own impacts, and you made an impact today. You've touched someone in a way that you may not have been able to before, or you may not be able to after, but today you have made an impact, at least in one space on What's the Tea. So you've made an impact with me. And so I just want to thank you. And I want you to know that I appreciate you so much. And I really am so thankful that you were able to come on today.
Thank you. And I feel this is our first time meeting. And we've heard a lot about each other for like thousands of mutual friends. And right. I'm just so grateful. Like our first meeting is live on it. I'm really grateful for you. And I so admire, this is one of Elliott and I had a little chat before we got on the public forum, and just so impressed and inspired by all the different things that you were checking out in your life and exploring, and this kind of expanded sense of purpose and identity. And this is just one of many things that you're involved with. And I think that's amazing. And I watched some of your past chats. I watched a few weeks ago with Josh, and it was beautiful. Like the things that you're so, you have such a wonderful attitude that you bring to the table of both listening and insightful wisdom and contribution. And like, we're talking about stuff that's really meaningful. So I'm grateful to have had this chance, and just the beginning of a friendship, I can tell.
Yes, I could tell too. I love it. Thank you. That was really touching, and I appreciate it. It is nice to hear that. So I will take that in, and I will accept it with love.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. And thank you who are watching as well.
Yes. Thank you so much to everyone who has joined us. I'm gonna pop Fleur back into the backstage, and I'm gonna give a little outro. I'm gonna give an outro, and just hang out backstage for a second, and I'll be right back.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Again, thank you so much for tuning in for What's the Tea with ACP today. We had the lovely Fleur Barron on. Had a wonderful conversation about inclusivity within our art form, and I'm so thankful that I was able to have this conversation today. Thank you again for tuning in She's tired. Thanks again for tuning in to What's the Tea with ACP, and I hope you join us again in 2 weeks. We have a special guest coming in. I'm not going to say her name yet, but be on the lookout. All right. Have a good one. Enjoy your Sunday.
He's